the live button now.
Had bronchitis for a month, so forgive. Everyone ready? Yep. Good morning. I'm Ramin Fadahi. I'm the Commonwealth's Attorney for the City of Norfolk. As the Commonwealth's Attorney, I've been in office for nearly 2 years. However, I am the inheritor of a long legacy of prosecutors and prosecution here in the City of Norfolk. Times that both would make us proud and times that would make us hang our heads. I'm here to try and open a new chapter on one of the darkest stories in Hampton Roads law enforcement. The sad and execrable story of the wrongful conviction of individuals and the rightful and justifiable conviction of a Norfolk police officer for corruption, and the legacy of those two things on the justice system and trust in the justice system in Norfolk today. 13 years ago today, a federal jury sitting on Granby Street here in Norfolk convicted a detective by the name of Robert Glen Ford of felonies having to do with public corruption and lying to federal investigators. Investigator Ford was a long-time and very respected investigator in the Norfolk Police Homicide Department. He was known for bringing in tough cases, seeking confessions and enabling the convictions of individuals. What his colleagues and what prosecutors in my office did not know was that Investigator Ford was prepared to take bribes, and did take bribes, from individuals charged with criminal offenses to come, to lie to prosecutors in my office, to claim that those individuals were assisting in murder cases, when all they were doing was lining Investigator Ford's pockets. This is not a story, even though it's one that even John Grisham found sufficiently interesting to look at. It is fact. Facts proven beyond a reasonable doubt in federal court by the federal prosecutors who held Investigator Ford accountable 13 years ago today. Investigator Ford went to prison, served his sentence, and has been released. But this was not Investigator Ford's first brush with controversy. Many of you may have heard of an infamous case in Norfolk known as the Norfolk Four. Investigator Ford was responsible in 1998 for extracting false confessions from 4 Navy sailors in the rape and murder of the spouse of a Navy sailor here in Norfolk. Unlike the crimes of Investigator Ford that went uncovered until the federal authorities investigated this one, or until they investigated this, this particular case attracted controversy from the very start. The history of it is long and twisted, but it boils down to this. Those 4 sailors confessed under coercion. They recanted their confessions. Prosecutors in this office pursued those convictions anyway, even after another individual confessed to having committed the crime alone, and DNA both excluded those sailors as contributors to the rape and murder and included that particular individual. Again, these are not a matter of personal opinion. They are stated, proven facts. Facts that have been proven in various courts, and ones that led 2 Virginia governors, Tim Kaine to issue conditional pardons to the Norfolk Four, and Terry McAuliffe to issue absolute pardons to them because they were innocent. During this whole time, Investigator Ford's name was linked to a number of other investigations, other convictions. It was not really until 2010 that bigger questions began to emerge regarding the integrity of the work that Investigator Ford had done. And this is the problem with a betrayal of trust. whether it is in a marriage, in a friendship, or in our public duties. The minute that you betray trust, you damage trust in everything you do, whether legitimate or illegitimate. And even the legitimate work that you do comes into question. The reason that we are here discussing this is no mere history lesson. It is because in the 13 intervening years, there has never been a comprehensive review of the cases that Robert Glen Ford was involved in. Never. In fact, the stance of the prosecutors who were involved in the Norfolk 4 case and the stance of most prosecutors, and one that many prosecutors in Virginia still follow, was to say, a jury spoke, that is the end of the story. A reflexive defense of the finality of convictions to the exclusion of the possibility that a system where police officers, eyewitnesses, jurors, judges, and yes, prosecutors are all human beings with human flaws and possibly human blindnesses may be wrong. May be wrong. I'm pleased to be able to announce today that we are taking the first step in conducting that review and in looking at every case that Robert Glen Ford has been associated with. Behind me are my partners in this very important endeavor. I am fortunate to be able to say that the University of Virginia School of Law, Professor Deirdre Enright, who is the former director of the University of Virginia Law Innocence Project and currently the director of the University of Virginia Law School's Project for Informed Reform, and the head of the clinic by that same name, has joined in a partnership with my office to digitize, scan, make available, subject to confidentiality rules, this information so that lawyers and law students at the University of Virginia may review these cases. This is not an academic exercise. There are still people in prison. There are people who have been released from prison. And the importance of this review is this. If those files reveal that either there were police irregularities or prosecutor irregularities, it is important for us to know that so that we can take whatever steps are necessary to make things right. Just as importantly, if a review of those files does not turn up any information, the process of reviewing them, the process of going through them, and while we may never know the full extent of Investigator Ford's misconduct, the ability to say these files do not reveal misconduct should help to restore the trust in the integrity of those convictions. This is more than a historical exercise, just as it's more than an academic one. The historical importance of this and the current day importance of it is that there are people in prison. Prosecutors' core duty is to keep our community safe, to hold accountable the people who commit crimes, especially violent crimes, especially homicides, but to do that by making sure that the right people are in prison for the right reasons, that they are in fact the perpetrators, that their constitutional rights were respected, and that we convicted them in the way that our values say they should have been. It is also important to victims. Some of the most important words that victims hear are, "We have made an arrest. We have arrested the person who harmed you or your family." Just as important are, "We have gone to trial and a jury has agreed that we have the right person." The biggest nightmare that a victim can have is the possibility that the person who victimized them or their family is walking free while an absolutely innocent person is sitting in prison. That is their nightmare and ours as prosecutors. The other piece of this, the other important aspect of it, is tied in with what we see in the streets and in the courthouses every day. Jurors do not trust the system the way they used to in the 1990s. The accused people do not trust them. Victims don't trust the system the way they used to. And part of the reason is all of the drumbeat of wrongful convictions, the drumbeat of violations of people's constitutional rights by prosecutors. The idea that the system delivers a different brand of justice to you depending on who your daddy is, or what zip code you live in, or who you know. That distrust in the system has a direct impact in the streets. For those of us who want to see fewer homicides, for those of us who want to see more arrests and more convictions in homicide cases, what we have to do is extend our hands, show our work, be prepared to say, we are willing to let an independent and neutral body of people review our work to make sure that we did it right, so that when somebody sees a non-stranger commit a violent crime against a non-stranger close to where they live, the thought in their head is not, I could call, but why would I in a system that produced this or this or this? The thought that I would hope that a project like this, an effort to clean out an infected and caked over wound, for better or for worse, may make a difference, even if it's just in one case, where in the middle of the night, when something bad happens, somebody might say, you know what, the folks in this system are trying to do their best. It may not be the safest thing in the world for me to do this, but I'm going to pick up that phone and I'm going to call. It may make me uncomfortable. People may call me a snitch, but I'll go to court and I'll raise my hand and I will tell the truth about what happened. And every person who does that is potentially one less person who resorts to retaliation and shooting it out in the streets. So if we really care about reducing homicides, if we really care about delivering a system of justice that we can all be proud of, we have to do these things. We have to be willing to show our work. We have to be willing to review the work that we have done, and we have to be willing to admit that we might be wrong. I have a few other words about how this process will physically work, and then I would like to recognize some of our guests here and turn over the lectern to them to speak about why they've chosen to be in Norfolk here today. Mechanically speaking, these files that we are reviewing, which at this point are over 170, over 90 of which we were able to identify ourselves through legacy searches in our case management system, and the remainder through the assiduous work of Professor Enright, are the number and counting of those files. All of those files were largely in paper, stored in an off-site storage facility. They were difficult to review, and obviously not something that is feasible to do from Charlottesville without making trips to Norfolk. They also were essentially not available to us to review. Professor Enright, who approached me shortly after I took office and inquired whether I had any interest in looking at Glen Ford's files, and which was one of the happiest messages I've received as Commonwealth's attorney, was the one to suggest that we work together. I give her credit. She solved a problem I did not know how to solve without pulling a whole bunch of prosecutors off the line where I needed them to prosecute today's cases. She also solved the credibility problem by lending her and her students' credibility to this project. Professor Enright was also the one who made it both financially possible and logistically possible to review these files. The courtesy of the University of Virginia and Professor Enright's clinic, University of Virginia hired an employee to assist in the digitization of these files. Jordan, I know you were here. Jordan is one of the heroes of this project. You raise your hand, Jordan. Jordan has digitized nearly all of those files. That is a service to my office that was no cost to the taxpayer. It now means that all of these files are in digital form should we ever need them. And they are now available for remote and confidential review by the University of Virginia School of Law. This review is simply that. Our agreement is that we will no longer do what a lot of prosecutors have done and continue to do, which is to engage in trench warfare in the courts, refusing to turn over this information, refusing even to let people look at it. We're not fighting that fight. We have nothing to hide. The partnership also means that Professor Enright will bring to us any irregularities that she and her students are able to identify. That does not necessarily mean that we will agree on everything, that we will agree that an irregularity in Professor Enright's eyes is an irregularity in ours. If we do agree, then we'll take whatever steps we can, which are frankly very limited under Virginia law. If we disagree, we will fight it out in the courts. But we will not fight over the right to know. The right to know will be eliminated as an obstacle. If we do agree, the remedies that are available at this point to the folks who are in prison or to the folks who are out will largely be in the state and the federal courts or through petitions for clemency to the governor. Unlike in a lot of other states where prosecutors have the power when they identify an injustice or a case of actual innocence, Virginia prosecutors do not have the power to resentence. We can't, regardless of whether our feelings are. So this process is not going to produce instant results. What it will produce is sunlight, which one of our United States Supreme Court justices described as the best disinfectant. And the project will not necessarily have an end point. One of the things that we will need help with in this partnership is help from you, the citizens of Norfolk and Tidewater and Virginia. If anybody within the sound of our voices believes that Glen Ford had a hand in an irregularity or in influencing a case in a way that would be improper, I ask that they contact Professor Enright and that they allow us to see if the name of that individual is in our files. We will review as many files as people ask for, and we will review them as thoroughly as necessary. On a larger note, this transparency is not just confined to our work with Investigator Ford. It applies to any claims of innocence, any claims of prosecutorial misconduct, or jury or justice system irregularities. And since taking office, I have adopted this same policy for any innocence request, any clemency request. So long as the lawyers are prepared to sign a confidentiality agreement that protects the information of victims and witnesses, they can look. I will not hide. And then we can debate whether we agree or we disagree. Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence said that the legitimacy of a government depends on the consent of those which it governs. An element of that is that the consent derives from trust. It derives from trust. If you can't trust your government, you won't work with your government. And if you don't work with your government cannot work for you. I took a pledge to be the Chief Minister of Justice for the city of Norfolk. I intend to keep it, no matter what. And I intend to do the right thing. And if it's taken 13 years to make amends, at least we're starting today. I'd like to recognize the folks behind me. I've already indirectly introduced you to Professor Enright, nationally prominent in innocence work, who will talk to you about not just the Norfolk Four, but the multiple other accused people who wound up serving time as a result of wrongful convictions. Professor Enright will also introduce you to her team from UVA Law. To my left are three very special guests. I would like for everybody to say hello to Eric Wilson. Eric Wilson is one of the Norfolk Four. Mr. Wilson has traveled here from out of state to stand in solidarity and to stand for all of the people who could not stand for themselves. Mr. Wilson was one of the four people who had, from whom Investigator Ford extracted a false confession. He was one of the four who had the courage to come out and say, I was coerced to go to trial. He was acquitted of some charges, convicted of others, and then spent 8.5 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He is here with his wife, Misty, and I'm thankful for both of them to be here. Next to Eric is Stephen Norfolk, retired partner from the firm of Troutman Pepper in Richmond, who has been on a multi-year odyssey with Mr. Wilson to seek his vindication, which ultimately came courtesy of Governor McAuliffe. And then behind them all are the not hopefully completely unsung heroes of this process, who are the UVA law students who are going to be lending their time and their intelligence and their efforts to ensuring the integrity of this work. I'm grateful to all of them because without them, I don't know that we would have been able to do this. And without their independent credibility, I don't know that people would have accepted our results no matter how well we did it. With that, I'd like to turn over the lectern to Professor Enright. Professor Enright will speak. We will probably have a few other speakers, and at the conclusion of our remarks, we will be willing to take questions on camera and on the record.
Well, thank you guys for coming here today. I'm Professor Deirdre Enright from UVA School of Law, and I can say for sure that I don't think I've ever heard a prosecutor say they were glad to hear a message from me. So that was really nice. On October 27th, 2010, you could say that the state of Virginia was on notice that it was time to look into the caseload of Robert Glen Ford the day he was convicted and sentenced. But before that, we were on notice as well, because there was a case that you can probably find archived called the Lafayette Grill murder case, where 3 juveniles had confessions extracted from them by Robert Glen Ford, and then it became clear that other people committed the crimes. He was temporarily demoted and then brought back in time to do the same to Eric Wilson and the Norfolk Four. Since then, the UVA Innocence Project has handled 4 Robert Glen Ford cases, Joseph Carter being fully exonerated and compensated by the state of Virginia. The other 3 are still in litigation, but there are fact findings in most of those cases that he was coercive, if not worse. Right now, there's a man in prison named Arsene Hicks, who, when he was 16 years old, was arrested along with a bunch of other juveniles who lived in a house on Dunkirk Avenue, and Glen Ford extracted a confession from him. The very next day, he said he didn't do it, and his lawyer had pictures of his bruised face taken to challenge the confession that he got. They were unsuccessful. The judge ruled that she said that if she were to believe the things that were being said about what Robert Glen Ford did to Arsene Hicks, she would have to believe we were living in the times of the Star Chamber. He is in prison still. That was December 30th, 1999. And he is still litigating, even though he has been in prison all that time and has recently discovered more photographs of his 16-year-old beaten face. So I have very little doubt when I say that I think we will probably find other cases in this review. There's no reason to think that the only cases where something terrible happened have already been found and taken care of. And so I was delighted that Ramin would let me and my clinic take on this project. I'm sure it will take time, and I also want people to pass on to the community that if somebody thinks they have a family member or a friend who was negatively affected by Robert Glen Ford, we will look into it. I want to thank the students behind me, Mallory Ross, Maya McCollum, Amina Mariam, Charlotte Simon, Elizabeth Patton, Jocelyn Lee, and Azalea Lopez, and others. If this works, we will probably double our project next year and have twice that many students. And I want to invite now Eric to come and tell you about his experiences with Robert Glen Ford, because he's exactly the reason why we should be looking into all these other cases. Eric?
Morning. I'm going to keep it short. I haven't prepared anything, and I normally don't. It's good to see that there are good people working in the system now to stop an entrenched corruption that is it's so bad that folks don't even realize there's corruption anymore. They don't see it, and it's just seen as the way we do business. And I'm glad to see that all these people back here working with the prosecutors for once are actually trying to look into this and help all of us out there that have been hurt. I know I'm not the only one. There's lots of folks out there. And there's lots of folks that are still out there that need to be found. If you go to DC, there's a quote, and I forget who said it, but there's a quote on a wall from one of our founding fathers that said, "It is better to have a guilty man go free than imprison an innocent man for a day." And I think we've forgotten this in our system, and we just want to punish somebody. And we need to realize that these somebodies are people. They have lives. I was just about to sign my re-enlistment papers in the Navy when I got arrested, subsequently thrown in prison, and lost my career. There's more to being thrown in prison than just prison itself. There's once you get out. And it sticks with you. Everyone knows that I was a sex offender. And as a registered sex offender, you can't get a job. You can't live in certain places. In certain states, you have to get the permission of your neighbors to move into a neighborhood. Are you free? No. No, you're not. And our system is setting people up for failure. Once you get out, they want you to fail. And they want you to go back. And this is part of that entrenched corruption that I mentioned. And all these wonderful people here behind me, our law students, politicians. Wow, they're trying to fix that. And they can't do it without everybody's help. Because they can't fix it alone. We need cops to come forward, say when they see something wrong. We need prosecutors to come forward and say when they see something wrong. We need people to come forward and not be scared to talk to somebody. And hopefully this is one step closer to getting there. Thank you.
Folks, if there are any questions, we're happy to take them.
You said you're going to digitize the documents and you're going to review them. Are they also going to be fielding calls, making calls to people, trying to find witnesses or anything like that? They're just kind of reading documents.
Yeah, so the question from Brendan Ponton, News 3, was will there be other follow-up investigations, telephone calls, inquiries? I'll let Deirdre speak to the particulars of it. It will very much depend on the case. But obviously, if something turns up, we don't just simply sit on what's in the file. There will be follow-up as appropriate.
Yeah, so we will definitely, we can't be certain that the paper file will be sufficient. It's certainly, all of 10 students have already started looking into cases, and we've already found things that we have to follow up on for sure. And I think the model of using the way we did this work in the Innocence Project will probably serve us well here, because we just basically go back and recreate the file starting with the Commonwealth's file and then building it out using attorneys' files, witness files, and calling witnesses if they're still alive and talking to them and looking for outside external evidence. So yeah, it's going to almost certainly involve way past the file.
Sorry if this was mentioned too, but you know approximately how many cases you're doing?
We're above 170 at this point. I would hope that there may be more that we haven't identified yet, but the part of the difficulty is that we are 2 or 3 digital case migrations forward from the case management system in existence in the 1990s. Record keeping, and especially electronic record keeping, wasn't as tidy as it is now. And so the review of the scanned files may create a connection that was not visible simply through case management searches or through Professor Enright's research. So we're not sure, but 170 plus at this point is our number. And that's where we need the public's help if they're to make sure that we're not missing any. Any other questions?
Can you say what years these cases are from, like beginning to end, like?
I can give you roughly they would have begun in the early to mid 1990s, and they would have continued up until Investigator Ford's retirement, which I'll defer to Professor Enright. I think it was roughly 2008, if I remember correctly. But through the end of Investigator Ford's career.
I mean, these are homicide cases. What other kind of cases are we talking about? I mean, we're going to go through even minor things if he was involved with those.
Anything we can identify. The bulk of them are going to be violent crime cases because Investigator Ford was a homicide investigator. But if obviously the criminal conduct that led to Investigator Ford's conviction and sentencing were largely drug-related cases, it will probably be impossible to identify them with any certainty because most criminal activity doesn't occur out in the open. But I think that you can assume that the bulk of those cases are either going to be homicides or other homicide-adjacent crimes, but we'll review anything, absolutely anything that we can. Any other questions?
Can you talk about how rare this level of access is to like one officer's set of cases?
So as far as we can tell, we have not found another corrupt cop anywhere in the country where a law school has been invited to look into the cases. So I think the project is unique in that way. Different states have had varying ways of handling when they've discovered a corrupt police officer. There's lots of different examples that you can look up, like the Dirty 30 is one of my favorites. And Brooklyn had a detective who had gotten, Detective Scarcella, who extracted confessions from way too many people, and they had their own people look into it. The advantage of having obviously a law school do it is that it's much more independent and it's much more transparent. And I have not found an example of anybody doing that yet.
You guys mentioned a system with innocent cases and also with clemency, because you know our system is eligible for parole. Anyone that's eligible for parole will support the release of the parole. Because I feel like if you can get a person like Garcia out, while you take years to try to go through this, he can come out and assist with cases. And I feel like with the current parole board, they want input from the Commonwealth office, and we're seeing Hicks was continuously being denied parole, and we know that his innocence is charged.
I have to choose my words carefully. The question was whether we would join in the request for parole of Mr. Hicks. I have to choose my words carefully and my overall strategy carefully. I appreciate the question. It's a perfectly legitimate one. It's not one that I'm in a position to answer at this point.
What are possible remedies that would possibly be happening with any of these cases? I know it varies from case to case, and what could somebody do to get rid of stuff that happen?
It depends on whether they are in prison or out of prison. The most obvious remedy is a pardon that is the exclusive province of the governor. whether it is what's called a conditional pardon, which essentially allows for people to be released but doesn't necessarily wipe away their conviction, or an absolute pardon, which is an affirmation of somebody's innocence, which is the pardon that cleared Eric Wilson, who, as he so eloquently pointed out, was branded a rapist for the rest of his life when he had raped no one. There are other remedies. Under Virginia law, there is something known as a writ of actual innocence. Those are filings that lawyers for people who are asserting their innocence can make, both in the trial and in the appellate courts. The standard of proof is pretty high. And frankly, the standard of proof for a pardon is higher usually. There is also what's known as a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, either in state or federal court, which is available to people who are serving time, but not to people generally not to people who've been released. Those are the possible remedies. None of those are remedies in which a Commonwealth's attorney is really directly involved. The power for all of them rests in other hands. What I am trying to do is to eliminate a very common and frankly all too common barrier, which is a refusal to make this information available to anybody inquiring about innocence. We clear that barrier. We don't argue over what the lawyers get to see. We simply argue, if there is an argument, over what it is. And I can tell you, I've seen firsthand the work that Professor Enright and her colleagues at the UVA Innocence Project have done. They have brought to light irregularities in other files that are ones where there was a question in a case very early in my tenure where there was an obvious irregularity, a piece of prosecutorial misconduct in the file, and the question was, we're under time pressure. At what point can we have this document? And the answer was, you can have it now. Take it now. Rather than fighting or frankly not understanding the significance of what was in the file. It took the innocence lawyers an explanation that particular document in that file nobody on the defense side had seen from 1996 on for me to understand what a serious matter it was. This review is about a review of the cases. That is what it's about. Our goal is to build public trust in the integrity of those convictions, if they merit it, and to, if there are irregularities, to help the people who may have had their rights violated or who may be serving time for somebody else who was guilty when they are not.
Clarifying whether the digitization process is fully done.
The question from Gavin Stone at the pilot was whether the digitization process was completely finished. It is not. It is largely finished. Jordan, in between her studies at Norfolk State, has done an excellent job in digitizing these files, but there are still some odds and ends. And it's never going to be truly done, because if we get additional inquiries and people add additional files, then somebody's got to digitize them.
Do you know how many hours you spent on it so far?
Jordan, you want to tell us how many hours you spent on this project?
I've been here since June, so I can say a little something.
Pretty much 40 hours a week since June.
Yeah, that's right. 40 hours a week since June. Any other questions? I'll close with this then. Yes? I'll close with this. So, we can't have a functioning justice system without trust. So, there's no lawyer in my office who is involved in any of these cases. They have all long since moved on. So, we operate in a different way. So, I am a reform prosecutor devoted to the ideas of reform, which include transparency like this. However, we are still accountable for the errors or for the oversights of our predecessors. I can also say that I've worked very closely with the Norfolk Police since I became Commonwealth's attorney. They are a 21st century law enforcement organization. I have faith in the work that they do and that they are doing their work in the right way. That is precisely why it is so important for us to go back into this dark chapter. It is because we have to do everything that we can to demonstrate that we are different and that we deserve the trust of our citizens. And we will continue to do that in every way we can so that we can hold our community, hold wrongdoers accountable, maintain our community's safety, and make sure that the words that say that we are all created equal aren't just words on a page. Thank you. Absolutely.